What up, Raf leaders? Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about mediocrity. So why am I talking about mediocrity? I will illustrate with a few examples. First of all, a lot of the comments in my videos recently have introduced extraneous reasons, ideas. Basically, people are interpreting all of the content through a political lens. People who see me criticize the current government think that I'm against the PPP, and people who see negative comments about structures that were built under the last government, the coalition government, think that I'm against the APNU. I, in fact, am independent. So none of what I say has a political interpretation or political lens. Part of the problem is we're a society that is accustomed to mediocrity. We have never really advanced out of a mediocre expectation. And this is important because in this era of oil and gas, when the country is growing rapidly, we need to establish rules, we need to establish standards, we need to establish licensing criteria. And so this is why I'm addressing this issue of mediocrity in this video. Now, what are the reasons for mediocrity? Why is it that this society is so mediocre? Why is it that we're accustomed to mediocrity? There are three reasons I'll advance. One is because we don't have any building codes. So even if we build new structures, we copy new buildings, we're not being answerable to a system of building codes that define how buildings should be constructed. So when I show you, for example, the new affordable houses that are being built by a certain Surinamese company, a company from Suriname came to Guyana and decided to build these affordable homes that people are calling chicken coops. Because we don't have any building codes, we can accept all of this, which is really mediocre, poor quality construction, design, and buildings, because we don't have any set standards that say this is how affordable houses should look or should be built. And I call your attention to what happens, what do affordable houses look like in other countries? These pictures give you an example of what affordable houses look like in the US. And the reason why is because they're building codes. You can't just come and build something in any neighborhood in the US. There are building codes that regulate how buildings are to be constructed and what materials can be used, what kind of architecture is acceptable, and so on and so on and so on. So affordable houses have to meet the same standards that ordinary houses have to meet. What makes them affordable is the fact that they are subsidized. In other words, the government is willing to pay a certain amount of the cost to a contractor so that houses can be built for people of low income. So this can work in one of two ways. They can say the contractor gets tax breaks, gets tax-free permits to build, or he gets concessions in terms of the government providing the backup, the collateral for loans which encourage people to buy the houses, or the government might subsidize the monthly rental. In some cases in the US, for example, they have a program of Section 8 that allows the government to pay directly to the landlord a certain portion of the rent for low-income clients. So this is how affordable housing works. It does not work by accepting poor quality, cheap materials to build a house and then passing on the liability. A house that is built of cheap materials is a liability in a storm or an earthquake or in some kind of natural disaster or flood. You don't build affordable housing by using cheap materials and passing on that liability to unsuspecting low-income clients, right? So this is the core of the problem with mediocrity. That is the reason, one of the reasons is because we do not have building codes. Second reason is because we don't really have, we have not embraced the concept of standards, international standards. Now for many, many years, so like the last 20 years, Guyanese companies have been encouraged to meet the ISO 9000 series of standards, right? So there are a number of series of standards for various industries, and if you wanted to manufacture goods for the international market, whether they be food products or any kind of products that you manufacture, they have to meet these ISO 9000 series of standards. And so companies have been over the years trying to get on board with these ISO 9000 series of standards, but it has not really caught on across the board. And for a lot of the manufacturing and construction being done in Guyana, there is no standardization, there is no set of ISO 9000 standards that are being followed, right? And so, for example, when you build roads in Guyana, the government, or a classic example is sidewalks. Now, if you look at the way sidewalks are built in the United States, if you go from one state to the next, you go from New York to California, you will find that sidewalks have the same dimensions, they have the same design, the curb cuts are the same, whether they be in the city or in the suburbs, the sidewalks are standardized, right? But if you look at a country like Guyana, you look at the way sidewalks are built, depending on who gets the contract to build the sidewalk can look very, very different. You know, some of the sidewalks that were recently built in Georgia are now flooded. They were built with paving stones that are sinking, with grass growing all around them. And if you look at the sidewalks that were built in the 1960s and 1970s, they actually meet some standard, some British standard. So if you walk on Durban Street, or if you walk on 3rd Street in Albert Town, or you walk on Newmarket Street where there's sidewalks, or even if you walk on downtown Georgetown, where the sidewalks have not yet been overbuilt by new construction, people now coming out and putting mounds of cement on the sidewalk. Those sidewalks that were built in the 60s and 70s are all standardized. They're built in exactly the same. The sidewalk on Church Street is the same as the sidewalk on Main Street and Republic Avenue and so on. So, but now, the sidewalks that are being built, whenever they're being built, are being built by contractors who come up with their own design and come up with their own style, their own dimensions, and there are no reserve, there is no accommodation for people with wheelchairs or for disabled people and so on. So that is one of the reasons, right? The second reason is that we don't have international standards that we adhere to. The third reason why we are a nation that is obsessed with mediocrity is because of the two. We are obsessed with mediocrity because we're always looking for shortcuts, right? So in a society that has no standards and standards are not enforced, people will constantly look for shortcuts. And so, for example, there's a businessman who told me, when he needed a license, he just paid a policeman and he got his license. So instead of following the rules where you have to get a learner's permit and you have to take a theory course that is a driving course administered by the police department, right? Traffic department. They give you a theory course that explains how the laws work in Guyana, which are different, for example, in Guyana compared to the USA or to the UK or wherever else you've been driving. These laws are different and you have to learn them in a theory course. Then you have to take the practical test, which involves a daytime driving test, a nighttime driving test, and then you take a parking test. So there are 4 parts to the driving course in Guyana. Instead, however, people take shortcuts. They bribe a policeman, they get their driver's license, and hence you have all of this chaos and mediocre driving on the road, right? People don't know the rules of the road because they never went through the process of learning how to drive through the proper channels and were able to purchase, basically bribe the police to get their licenses. And that is in an epidemic. Like I said, there was this businessman who explained to me that's how he got his license. And if businessmen are doing it, you know that this is not a one-off experience. This is kind of common. So when you drive on the roads in Guyana, you have to look out for people who have absolutely no understanding of the rules of the road, and therefore they're breaking the laws and they're completely unaware that they're doing it because they never learned, right? They just bought their license. And so you have all these accidents, fatal accidents. It's one of the reasons why I explained in a previous video that if you're coming to Guyana, do not drive on the roads in Guyana. Don't rent a car and drive as if you were in New York, or you're traveling from one state to the next. Don't rent a car to drive. Pay a chauffeur to take you around, because at least the people who are professional drivers, they have experience of the road, they understand the culture, and they understand the dangers of sharing the road with people who have taken shortcuts. And finally, the reason why we are a nation obsessed with mediocrity is because we don't have a professional coded system for employment in Guyana. In other words, we don't have a professionalized system. There are very few professions in Guyana where you actually need a license to practice. Our teachers, for example, do not need a license. If you go to New York, or you go to London, you go to Canada, if you want to teach, you need a license to teach. In Guyana, you don't need a license to teach. And that is exactly what happens throughout the society, because we don't have licensed professions, right? We don't have a system where we've professionalized each occupation in the society, and each occupation has to follow a certain system of training and then licensure. That means that people are not standardized. Everybody can do their own thing, do things their own way. So for example, the people who operate in the food industry are not really licensed to operate. You can set up something on the sidewalk and sell plantain chips, which you've made at home. You don't have to follow any standard professional licensing that permits you to do that. Similarly, if you want to be a contractor, you want to be a bricklayer and so on, there is no licensing, right? If you want to be, the only things that are licensed in Guyana are lawyers and nurses and doctors. So two professions, the healthcare profession and the legal profession. But everybody else in the society is just laissez-faire, do as you please, do as you understand it. So because we don't have a systems of licensing and professionalizing jobs throughout the society, this leads to mediocrity. So guys, that is the lens through which I am commenting on this channel. When I comment the building looks like a monstrosity, I'm actually comparing it to a society where these buildings have building codes that guide their construction and that they follow. And so you can't just put up any old building in countries where they are building codes, but you can do that in Guyana, and the result is buildings that look like monstrosities, because you don't have building codes. You have people behaving haphazardly and using the roads in a mediocre manner because people are taking shortcuts and are not following the rules because they never got their license in the regular and legal way. And you have construction, buildings or road construction and being done in Guyana in a haphazard and a mediocre way because we don't have a ISO 9000 system that we follow for all of our construction and all of our designs and all of our buildings. We don't have a standardized system in Guyana. And this is important because we're going through one of the most rapid expansions in our economy. Guyana is now earning over about $2 billion a year in oil and gas. I'm going to do a video coming up on the current value of our natural resource fund, the sovereign wealth fund, and how quickly it's growing. We're now north of $1.5 billion in the fund. The next first quarter of 2023 will reveal that, and by the end of this year we'll have over $2 billion in our natural resource fund. And the economy is growing rapidly, but there is no system or regulation or standards or rules in place, and so we're getting a lot of mediocre development, right? That is the cause for my comments. So guys, none of this is about me supporting one political party or the other political party. Just because I criticize the work that is done under your favorite political party does not mean that I'm against your politics. It's just that because the society does not have rules that we're following, mediocrity is prevalent on both sides of the political divide. For example, the last time one political party was in power, they attempted to build a fiber optic line. I remember in that case, it was the son of the president at that time who was given the job to build the fiber optic line. It was a disaster and a waste of money. Why? Because mediocrity does not have a political party. When they built that pavilion in Dublin Park, those pavilions in Dublin Park are now falling apart. Again, that was because mediocrity doesn't have a political party, right? If we had building codes and standards, somebody would have said, okay, if we're going to use public funds to build an arena, then we must meet some established standards, and you would have arrived at something like the Staples Center, for example, or you would have arrived at something like the Nassau Coliseum, right? The thing that was eventually constructed looked like something drawn out of the 1960s, pre-independence Guyana, right? Built with wood, instead of something that should have looked like Madison Square Garden. So because we don't have standards, our mediocrity appears on both sides of the political divide. So that's what's happening, guys. I just wanted to give you an update on what I think is responsible for mediocrity in Guyana and why my comments are the way they are. They're not political. I'm not looking at this country through a political lens, but I am being critical because we're going through rapid expansion, and this is a time when we should really be capitalizing on construction that is of the highest quality so that it will be here for generations to come. In the comments below, tell me what you think about the standards of operation and construction and behavior in Guyana, and whether in fact you subscribe, you understand my concept of mediocrity. In other words, why things are the way they are and why I think it's time for us to lift our standards, because going forward, with all the money that's flowing into the economy, we really need to build things that last. Share this video with friends and family around the world. Let people know what's happening here in Georgia and Guyana. Later!